we're not officially giving up the constitutional debt brake, but I think it's going to be buried alive. We have had an underinvestment in German infrastructure of more than 600 billion euro over the last decade. Just throwing money at the economy will not be enough to really bring Germany back.
German lawmakers are about to change the constitution to allow future governments to take on more debt. They're also setting aside 500 billion euros in special funding for infrastructure and climate projects. It's a big shift from recent years in which the government has tried to tighten its fiscal belts instead of loosening it. Well, Carsten Jeske, chief economist for ING here in Germany, joins me now for more. Carsten, how big a shift is this for Germany when we look at finances?
This is a huge shift. It is historic, in all honesty, because we were so used to this fiscal debt brake, so more or less, the constitutional rule that the German government is not allowed to have any budget deficits. So this is really a historic shift, and it should hopefully also help finally modernizing the German infrastructure, which has been suffering under the fiscal debt brake. Because when you look at Germany, we have had an underinvestment in German infrastructure of more than 600 billion euro over the last decade.
At the same time, the criticism is that a lot of this funding could be used for more consumption, not to address really big items like investment. What do you say to that?
I think that is a fully justified criticism. And I think it is now up to the hopefully incoming next government to really make sure that this additional spending goes into future-oriented investments and is not used for consumption. Because indeed, this was also, when you look back, this was one of the reasons that Germany actually introduced this constitutional fiscal debt brake in order to avoid that politicians are just spending taxpayers' money irresponsibly. So, of course, now with loosening the screws, with making a complete U-turn on fiscal policies, it doesn't mean that the politicians should now be irresponsible with taxpayers' money, because this is really lots of money. It will be about ensuring that this additional spending goes into infrastructure. And there are ways how you can do this. Well, for example, get experts on board, have a good organizational structure that ensures that the money is really going into investment and is not just channeled into other government consumption.
Let's look at the investment side of this. These are projects that could take a lot of time to get off the ground. What kind of influence is that going to have on the German economy, which is in such need right now of a boost? Is it going to take a while?
Definitely, it's going to take a while. In infrastructure spending takes a while before it really reaches the economy. That is one thing. And the other thing, of course, is that even if we get everything now passed through to Parliament and then also through the Federal Council, we still don't have a government. Let's not forget that. So it will also clearly depend on whether we will get a next government and what will be in this government coalition agreement. That is important. Why is that important? Because if we really were to see structural reforms, a longer term vision on how to kind of overhaul the entire German economy, this would clearly then help to already get a confidence boost for the entire economy. But when you just look at the money spent, when you look at the money spent, this is going to take a while, and this taking a while means projects have to be identified. There will have to be public tenders. You will have companies then really enrolling in these public tenders. And well, let's not forget, I think we should see a confidence boost already now in the next coming months. But before we really see significant impact on the real economy, in the sense of when will we get finally higher growth, this is only a story for 2026 and 2027.
When we talk about structural reforms, a lot of people point to bureaucracy. They point to approval processes for some of these major projects. We've seen here in Germany, it's taken a long time to build major infrastructure projects from airports to train stations. How critical is it that those issues be solved, and how realistic is it to make the most out of this money?
These are very good points you're making here, because this is also key in order to make sure that these 500 billion euro are really used in the most efficient way. Um, So, which means reduce bureaucracy, make sure that also procurement, that regulation is simplified. If it doesn't, there is a big risk that this money just evaporates somewhere, but it's not really reaching the real economy. So that also shows it by just throwing money at the economy, this will not be enough to really bring Germany back to, I don't know, Wirtschaftswunder 3.0. It is a kind of a bare necessity. It is a basic requirement that Germany needs. But we need more. And this needing more means really make sure that bureaucracies, that also regional governments are actually able to implement the measures. Really, to try to reduce regulation, try to make it easier to get this money really into the real economy. And if this happens, then I think we should really see the start of a modernizing of the German infrastructure.
Carson, what kind of projects will you be looking forward to when it comes to this money, or will you be looking at to make sure that this is actually addressing those structural issues and not just consumption?
Yeah, I think it's very easy. I think we now have like 50 or more bridges on German highways that are really up for renewal, that are they're actually at the risk of breaking down. So this is kind of conventional infrastructure. Really modernize the conventional infrastructure. Also modernize the trailway system. So we need more high speed trains in Germany. We need high speed rails in order to get these trains here. That is something. We also need a modern digitalization. So we really need glass fiber everywhere. So ensure that there is a modern infrastructure for conventional logistics, trains, cars, trucks, but there is also a modern infrastructure called digitalization. If I was to see these projects being announced, this would clearly make me much happier and also much more optimistic about the German economy. But let's not forget, that even if we were to see all these projects now coming and then hopefully being implemented faster than previous kind of star infrastructure projects. Just think of the airport outside of Berlin, which took like 10 years. So we clearly would need to see more speed. But even if we were to see all these projects coming and being implemented, and let's say we have a really nice, fancy, modern infrastructure again in Germany in 5 or 10 years from now, this would also not be enough because we still need the structural changes in order to have more innovation, to still have companies that are actually able to face global competition, that are producing goods and services that can really keep up with global competition. And that is something you cannot achieve by just throwing money into infrastructure. Having a modern infrastructure is clearly a bare necessity, but it doesn't mean that you're automatically becoming a highly competitive economy again.
Give us an idea what kind of reforms you're talking about there. Are you talking about labor, for example? We know, of course, that German society is aging much faster, so finding some of these experts and skilled labor will be difficult in the years ahead.
Labor is clearly one, and labor actually is an even or has become an even more pressing issue now with this fiscal package. Because this also means if we're throwing money into the economy right now, but we still have a lack of qualified workers, what does this bring? It brings us inflation. So kind of solving the labor issue is clearly a structural reform, which would require Germans to work longer. I think that is one, which would also require to have a more regulated inflow of immigrants, highly qualified immigrants. That is one thing. But I would like to see more, and that is how do you stimulate innovation again? We still have very good universities in Germany. We still have very good research in Germany, but we don't manage to actually bring innovation, good research into the markets. So that is something where have innovation and also make sure that this is really bringing services and products into the market, which would require probably more risk capital, which would probably also require more startups, and also the environment that could foster more startups. That is clearly something I would like to see. I would also like to see, for example, easier or more incentives to invest in Germany again. And these incentives could also mean any investment in digital technologies, but also into green technologies, um, will be um, will be helped by faster write-downs, for example. That could also be a very good measure in order to bring investments back into the own economy. The other thing we have in Germany is that we still have a problem in really mobilizing women into the labor market. We still have a very high ratio of women who work part-time. So increasing the participation ratio of women in the labor market would also help not only tackling the problem of a lack of qualified workers, but would also help actually increasing the entire, well, productivity in Germany.
Carson, a big part of the effort to change this debt break rule in the Constitution has been the need to see more expenditures on defense in Germany. There's an agreement across the board that Germany is going to have to fund more of its own defense, or generally across the board, I should say, there's agreement. What could that mean for the economy when we look at companies that may previously, maybe they focused on the auto industry or were primarily producing components for them? They may have a foot in armaments, and now suddenly they're facing a lot more money for that. Could we see the German economy, which has been struggling for the past 2 years, could we see a boost through industry that actually serves as a kind of bridge to something in the future? What do you see there?
I think we could, but in my view, the defense industry or money for the defense industry will be more something of a slow burner for the German economy. And so clearly, due to the geopolitical changes, it has to be done. We need to see this big increase in defense spending because Germany, Europe needs to be able actually to have its own security, and we've learned that we can no longer count unconditionally on the US. So therefore, this is a geopolitical necessity that has to be done. Is it really now a big growth driver for the economy or industry? Not yet. It's a slow burner. And when you look at, for example, that all the defense spending of the last couple of years, 60 to 80% of the European defense spending actually went to countries outside of the EU, very often the US, because we didn't have the production facilities. So if it is now really becoming clear that Germany, but also the rest of Europe, is increasing defense spending, then we will see that gradually on the domestic defense industry will also increase its production capacities, its production facilities, and therefore slowly on this industry will become more important. To give you some numbers, currently in Germany, think the defense industry has the size of what is it, 0.5% of GDP. So it is still a very small one. Automotive, for comparison, is 4 to 5% of GDP. So we're coming from a very low level. And yes, the more money goes into the defense industry, the more important this industry will become. And we will see that over the next couple of years. It will take over maybe some parts of losses from the automotive industry. And there is already anecdotal evidence that we see companies in the defense industry taking over employees from the automotive industry, but it's still fractional. Um, and I think therefore, I said slow burner, but eventually we know from other countries that the defense industry can also be an important source of innovation. And I think that is also an important one. So no, let's say, no silver bullet, well, to say in these terms for now, but clearly a growing growth driver over the next couple of years.
Let's take a step back and look at the EU level. Germany has been, to this point, always a strong proponent of tight deficit rules for EU member countries. It looks like it's going to dip into much more deficit spending in the years ahead. What does that mean on an entire EU level? Does it mean that we're going to see those deficit rules loosen? Is there any danger in that, or is it a necessity?
The German fiscal debt brake had always been stricter than the European fiscal rules. So by more or less giving up, and of course we're not officially giving up the constitutional debt brake, but I think it's going to be buried alive. Let's be clear on that. So by that, Germany is now moving more or less to the European fiscal rules, and now the big question is if we really get this European push that for all of Europe, defense spending, one way or the other, will be excluded from the European fiscal rules. This would clearly mean a loosening of Europe's fiscal rules. In the short run, I think this is something Europe is simply facing, without having any judgment on that. The big risk, of course, is if Germany, which had been clearly a guardian of fiscal solidity in Europe over the last 15 years. If Germany now is really moving to looser fiscal policies, that the rest of Europe will also follow suit. And that is clearly not what Germany wants, or this is probably not what the next German government would like to see. But in reality, this is a big risk we're going to see. So loosening of fiscal policies all around Europe, and again, short term needed in order to give money for the defense industry, in order to stimulate the economy. But longer run, clearly the risk of another eurozone debt crisis is clearly increasing if Germany now gives up this kind of this kind of label of being the by leading by example with very strict fiscal policies.
Opponents of this constitutional change are pointing out that debt will rise, of course, and that it could go as high as 80 to 90% of GDP in Germany from about 60%, if I have that figure right. How meaningful is that?
That is definitely meaningful, and financial markets are clearly following it very closely. That is one of the reasons why we saw the interest rate on German bond yields going up significantly. Um, but is Germany at the risk of going bust? No, definitely not. So Germany is still currently one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios of all European countries. If we were to go to something like 80% of GDP, that is still very much manageable. If, and I think that is the important one, if this additional debt is really used to increase growth and also to increase structural growth of the German economy, because then it was for a better good. If the money is only used for consumption, and will not help increasing Germany's potential growth rate, then it's more or less wasted money, and then we're just ending up with higher debt. But what it means, I think, also without really kind of any judgment, it means Germany will have higher debt, meaning it will have higher interest rates. This is clearly not an issue yet when you look across all other industrialized countries. The US, France, Japan, they all have much higher debt to GDP ratios. So Germany is still one of the better pupils of class.
All right, Carsten Jeske, Chief Economist for ING in Germany. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.